This girl was being abused by her violent father, a ruthless millionaire. But while at the hospital to treat yet another injury, a little 6-year-old boy takes an incredible step. "Sir, don't hit her. Hit me. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important." The smell of hospital disinfectant filled Theodora's nostrils as she settled young Benny on the makeshift couch in the nurse's lounge. It was her 3rd shift in a row that week, and once again she hadn't been able to find someone to watch her son. At 10 years old, the boy was used to nights at County General Hospital in Willow Creek, always carrying his inseparable asthma inhaler in his worn backpack. "Mom, I'm hungry," Benny murmured, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Just a little longer. Honey, soon the lady from the cafeteria will be here with that grilled cheese you love," Theodora replied, adjusting the thin blanket over him. The clock read 7:43 p.m. When the first scream echoed down the hall. Theodora recognized the tone immediately. It was a child's scream. In her 15 years as a nurse, she had learned to distinguish every type of pain that arrived at that emergency room. "Stay right here, okay? Don't leave this couch," she instructed her son, already running towards the screams. In the emergency room entrance, a little girl was writhing in the arms of a tall, well-dressed man. Her delicate face was stained with tears and blood running from a deep cut on her forehead. "It was an accident," the man barked before Theodora could even ask anything. "She fell down the stairs. She's always been clumsy." There was something in his tone that made Theodora's stomach churn. In 15 years of profession, she had heard that same explanation dozens of times, always accompanied by the same authoritative look that discouraged questions. "Please come with me," Theodora said, guiding them to the emergency room. The girl wouldn't stop crying, but her sobs were restrained, as if she were trying to make as little noise as possible. When Theodora tried to touch her, she flinched, instinctively. "What's her name?" Theodora asked, keeping her voice gentle as she prepared the materials to clean the wound. Katerina Vanderbilt," the man replied dryly. "I'm Arthur Vanderbilt, CEO of Vanderbilt Mining. I imagine you know the name." Theodora knew it. Everyone in Willow Creek knew it. Vanderbilt Mining was the largest employer in the region, and its owner, one of the most powerful men in the state. "I need to examine Katerina properly," Theodora said. "Could you wait in the waiting room?" "No, I'll stay here," he replied, crossing his arms. The examination revealed more than the cut on her forehead. There were old bruises on the girl's arms, yellowish marks that told a different story than the accidental fall. Katerina remained silent, responding only with nods to Theodora's gentle questions. That's when Benny, disobeying his mother's instructions, appeared in the doorway. His eyes met Katerina's, and something inexplicable happened. The girl, who had until then kept her eyes fixed on the floor, looked up. "Hi," Benny said shyly. "I get hurt a lot too. Want to see my scar?" Before Arthur could protest, Benny had already entered the room and was showing off a mark on his knee, the result of a bicycle fall. For the first time since arriving, Katerina managed a small smile. "What's this brat doing here?" Arthur barked, standing up abruptly. The sudden movement made Katerina flinch again, and Benny, noticing the girl's fear, took a step forward as if he wanted to protect her. "He's my son," Theodora explained, placing herself between Arthur and the children. "I apologize for the intrusion. He's leaving now." But something had changed in the atmosphere of the room. Katerina was holding Benny's hand firmly, as if that small contact was her only source of security. "How long is this going to take?" Arthur asked, impatiently checking his gold watch. "I need to put a few stitches on her forehead," Theodora replied, "and I'd like to do some additional tests to make sure there isn't—" "No," Arthur interrupted. "Just do what's necessary. We have to go." While suturing Katerina's wound, Theodora noticed more marks. small scars on the girl's back, visible through the opening of her dress. Her training and experience screamed that this wasn't the result of simple accidental falls. "Done," she finally said, after applying the last stitch. "But I strongly recommend that—" "How much?" Arthur interrupted, already pulling out his wallet. "The care is covered. There is no charge." Arthur threw a few $100 bills on the table anyway, grabbed Katerina's arm and pulled her out of the room. The girl cast one last look at Benny, her eyes filled with a sadness that no child should carry. After they left, Theodora hugged her son, who was still staring at the door. "Mom," Benny said with a seriousness surprising for his age, "that girl's hurt inside too, isn't she?" Theodora felt a lump in her throat. Her son had always been sensitive to the pain of others, perhaps because of his own experience with the asthma that had plagued him since he was little. "Come on, let's go back to the couch," she said, avoiding the question. But her mind couldn't shake the image of Katerina's frightened eyes, nor the way Arthur Vanderbilt had practically dragged her out of the hospital. That night, while Benny finally slept on the makeshift couch, Theodora began to fill out a detailed report about the care. Her hands trembled slightly as she documented every mark, every bruise she had found on Katerina's body. She knew that probably nothing would happen. Arthur Vanderbilt was too powerful, had too much influence in the small town. The sound of her cell phone startled her. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Theodora Mendez, I would like to make you a job offer. Come to the Vanderbilt mining office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Arthur Vanderbilt." Her heart raced. How had he gotten her number? What did he want? Was it a veiled threat because of the report she was filling out? She looked at Benny sleeping and thought of the overdue bills, the increasingly expensive medications for his asthma, the rent she didn't know how she would pay at the end of the month. Since Roberto had disappeared 3 years ago, every day was a struggle to keep her head above water. With her hands still trembling, she picked up her cell phone to reply. Before she could type anything, another message arrived. "It's not an invitation, it's a summons." The Vanderbilt mining office was an imposing building that clashed with the simple architecture of Willow Creek. Theodora held Benny's hand firmly as she crossed the marble lobby. She hadn't been able to find anyone to watch him again. "Name?" the receptionist asked without looking up from her computer. "Theodora Mendez. I have a meeting with Mr. Vanderbilt." The change was immediate. The receptionist straightened her posture, her face taking on an expression of surprise and apprehension. "Ah, yes, Mr. Vanderbilt is expecting you on the top floor." The mirrored elevator reflected Theodora's image, her hair tied in a messy bun, the deep circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, the hospital uniform still crumpled in her bag. Benny squeezed her hand when the doors opened. Arthur Vanderbilt stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the town that practically belonged to him. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Sit down," he ordered, still with his back turned. Theodora occupied one of the leather chairs in front of the massive mahogany desk. Benny sat beside her, fidgeting. "How much do you make at the hospital?" Arthur asked abruptly, finally turning to face her. "Excuse me?" "Your salary. How much?" Theodora swallowed hard before answering. The amount she mentioned made Arthur let out a dry laugh. "I offer triple," he said, sitting down, "to be Katerina's private nurse." Theodora's heart raced. Triple her salary. She could pay off the debts, buy Benny's medications, maybe even save a little. "Why me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Because Katerina responded well to you and to your son." His gaze fell on Benny, who met his gaze with a courage that surprised even his mother. "And because I need someone discreet." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. "And what exactly would my role be?" to take care of Katerina full-time. Supervise her health, accompany her routine. I have frequent trips, and the nannies haven't been adequate. And where would I live? In the mansion, of course. You and your son would have a room in the servants' quarters, all meals included, full health insurance. He paused significantly. That would cover the boy's asthma. Theodora felt as if she had been punched. How did he know? I did my research, Arthur said, as if reading her thoughts. I know about the debts to the pharmacy, the overdue rent, the loans you took out to pay for the boy's treatment. I also know about your husband who disappeared 3 years ago without a trace. Benny squeezed her hand harder. His father's disappearance was a subject that still hurt him deeply. And I know, Arthur continued, leaning over the table, about the report you started filling out last night. Theodora felt an icy shiver run down her spine. So, do you accept the offer? It wasn't an offer. It was a trap, and she knew it. But what choice did she have? When would I start? Today, now. Arthur pushed a contract in her direction. Sign. I need to organize my things, notify the hospital. It's all been taken care of. The hospital received your resignation letter this morning. Your things will be taken to the mansion later today. Despair began to rise in Theodora's throat. He had planned everything, had given her no choice. Mom, Benny's voice sounded softly beside her. Can we help her? Her son had understood everything. He wasn't thinking about the medications, the money, the health insurance. He was thinking about Katerina. With trembling hands, Theodora signed the contract. Great, Arthur said, collecting the papers. George will take you to the mansion, and Theodora. He stared at her with cold eyes. I hope you understand the importance of discretion in our agreement. The driver who drove them to the mansion didn't say a word during the entire journey. Benny looked out the window of the luxurious car, watching the familiar streets of Willow Creek fade into the background as they climbed the hill where the wealthiest houses in the town were located. The Vanderbilt mansion was even more imposing than the office. A 3-story palace surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens and protected by high walls. There, Benny whispered, pointing to a window on the 2nd floor. Theodora followed, her son's gaze, and saw Katerina. The girl was standing behind the lace curtain, watching them arrive. When she realized she had been seen, she quickly disappeared. The housekeeper, a sour-faced woman named Mrs. Higgins, led them to their quarters in the annex. It was a simple but clean room with 2 single beds and a small bathroom. Meals are served promptly at 7 a.m., 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the employee's kitchen, she informed them dryly. Mr. Vanderbilt doesn't like delays. Miss Katerina wakes up at 6:30 for breakfast. She takes a bath at 7:30, has homeschooling until 2 p.m., a snack at 3 p.m., and must be in bed by 8 p.m. Any deviation from this routine must be reported immediately to the boss. As soon as they were alone, Benny sat on the bed looking around, with wide eyes. Mom, he said softly, it looks like a pretty prison, doesn't it? Before Theodora could answer, they heard a noise coming from the hallway. When they opened the door, they found a small note that someone had slipped under it. It was a rough drawing of 3 people holding hands, 1 tall, 1 medium, and 1 small. In the corner, in a child's handwriting, was written, "Thank you for coming." Theodora sat on the bed next to her son, the drawing trembling in her hands. What had she gotten herself into? What would happen if she discovered something she shouldn't? How would she protect not only her son, but also that girl, who clearly needed help? A distant scream echoed through the house, followed by the sound of something breaking. Benny grabbed her hand. "It's going to be okay, honey," she said, trying to convince herself. "It's going to be okay." But as the night fell over the Vanderbilt mansion, Theodora had the terrible feeling that she was entering something much bigger and more dangerous than she could imagine. What had happened to Katerina's mother? Why had all the previous nannies left? And why was Arthur Vanderbilt so interested in keeping everything a secret? The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway made her hold her breath. Arthur Vanderbilt passed by her door, his deep voice muttering something unintelligible. A child's sob was the only response. On that first night in the mansion, Theodora didn't sleep. She stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaking of the old timbers, the wind in the corridors, and the muffled cries coming from upstairs, where a girl who desperately needed help was sleeping. The first rays of sunlight had barely pierced the curtains when Theodora woke up with a start. The clock read 6:15 a.m., and she could hear the hurried footsteps of the employees in the corridors of the mansion. Benny was still sleeping soundly, curled up in the new blankets that smelled of expensive fabric softener. With a heavy heart, Theodora woke him up gently. "Honey, we need to get ready. We can't be late on the first day." While helping Benny with the new uniform they found folded on the dresser, courtesy of Arthur Vanderbilt, Theodora tried to mentally organize the routine they would have to follow. Her son would attend the most prestigious private school in Willow Creek, another benefit of the new job that sounded more like a form of control. Exactly at 6:30 a.m., Theodora knocked gently on Katerina's door. There was no answer. "Katerina?" she called softly, opening the door carefully. The room was a shocking contrast to the rest of the mansion. While all the other rooms boasted expensive furniture and sophisticated decor, here everything was frighteningly impersonal. No toys in sight, no drawings on the walls, no photos. Just a bed too big for such a small child, an antique wardrobe, and an empty desk. Katerina was sitting on the edge of the bed, already fully dressed and combed, her hands crossed on her lap like a little adult. The bandage on her forehead was a painful reminder of the night before. "Good morning, Katerina," Theodora said softly. "Do you remember me?" The girl nodded without looking up. "I brought someone you met yesterday," Theodora continued, signaling Benny to come in. Katerina's face lit up for a brief moment when she saw the boy, but quickly returned to her previous restrained expression. "Hi," Benny said, approaching cautiously. "Can I sit with you?" Another silent nod. Breakfast was served promptly at 7 a.m. in the main dining room, a long, dark wood table where Arthur sat at the head, Katerina to his right, and now Theodora and Benny occupied assigned places to the left. "You need to eat properly, young lady," Arthur said when Katerina only stirred her spoon in the oatmeal without eating. His voice had a threatening tone that made Theodora shudder. "Looks good to me," Benny commented innocently, tasting his own. "Oatmeal. My mom always says I need to eat well because of my asthma." Katerina looked up, meeting Benny's encouraging gaze, and took a small spoonful to her mouth. "The driver will take your son to school," Arthur informed her dryly. "Meanwhile, I want you to sit in on Katerina's lessons today. I need to travel on business and won't be back until tonight." As soon as Arthur left, taking with him the suffocating atmosphere that his presence imposed, Theodora saw Katerina visibly relax her shoulders. "Bye, Katerina," Benny said before leaving with the driver. "Will you show me your room properly later?" It was the first time Theodora had seen a genuine smile on the girl's face. The private lessons were taught by different teachers who came at specific times. Math, English, reading, piano, an exhausting routine for a 6-year-old. Katerina struggled to maintain perfect posture and answer everything correctly, but Theodora could see the fatigue in her small shoulders. During snack time, while Katerina ate her fat-free and sugar-free cookies in silence, Theodora decided to try to connect with her. "Do you like to draw, Katerina?" The girl looked nervously around before answering in a whisper. "I'm not allowed to. Daddy says it's a waste of time." "And what do you like to play?" "I can't play. I have to study to be someone in life." The phrase sounded rehearsed, as if she were repeating words heard hundreds of times. Theodora's heart ached. You know, when I was little, I loved making up stories. Want me to tell you one? Katerina's eyes widened with interest, but before she could answer, Mrs. Higgins appeared at the door. "Mr. Vanderbilt called," she announced in her stern way. "He wants to know how the girl is behaving." Theodora noticed Katerina stiffen instantly, returning to her statue-like posture. "Tell him everything is fine," Theodora replied, keeping her voice firm. "Katerina is being very diligent." When the housekeeper left, Theodora noticed something that chilled her to the bone. There were cameras, small, discreet, but they were there, in the corners of the walls, watching every movement. In the afternoon, when Benny returned from school, he found Katerina finishing her last lesson of the day, piano. The teacher, a stern-looking woman, would tap the girl's arm with a ruler every time she missed a note. "No!" Benny shouted from the door, startling everyone. "You can't hurt her!" The teacher turned around, indignant. "Who is this rude child?" "My son," Theodora said, quickly entering the room. "And he's right. There's no need for physical punishment." "I've always taught this way," the teacher retorted. "Mr. Vanderbilt approves of my methods." "Well, now I'm the one taking care of Katerina," Theodora replied, surprising herself with her firmness. "And I won't allow this anymore," the teacher huffed out, promising to report the incident to Arthur. As soon as they were alone, Katerina ran to Benny and hugged him, taking everyone by surprise. "Nobody ever," she began, but her voice failed. "Nobody ever what?" Benny asked gently. "Nobody ever defended me before." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car arriving. Arthur was back earlier than expected. Katerina quickly moved away from Benny, returning to her usual rigid posture. During dinner, the tension was palpable. Arthur didn't say anything, but his furious gaze made it clear that he already knew about the incident with the piano teacher. "Tomorrow, we will start looking for a new teacher," he said finally, his voice as sharp as ice. "One who understands the importance of discipline." That night, after putting Katerina to sleep, Theodora found Benny sitting on their bed, hugging his knees. "Mom," he said with a trembling voice, "there has to be a way to help her." "There has to be, honey," Theodora replied, hugging him. "There has to be." But while she rocked her son to sleep, Theodora felt the weight of the cameras on them, the suffocation of the walls that surrounded them, and the growing certainty that there were far more horrors hidden in that mansion than she could imagine. What had happened to Katerina's mother? Why were there no pictures of her around the house? And why did Arthur seem so obsessed with controlling every aspect of his daughter's life? A noise in the hallway made her hold her breath. Footsteps, a door opening, and then the sound she feared the most, Katerina's muffled crying, echoing through the night, while Arthur's deep voice whispered threats that the thick walls of the mansion couldn't completely muffle. The weeks dragged on in the Vanderbilt mansion like a chronic illness, each day bringing new, disturbing discoveries. Theodora began to notice patterns. The days when Arthur came home smelling of alcohol were the worst. At those times, she kept Benny locked in the room, praying that the screams upstairs would end soon. On one of those nights, when the storm was battering the windows of the mansion, Theodora woke up to a gentle touch on her arm. It was Benny, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, Katerina's crying differently today." She had noticed it too. It wasn't the usual restrained crying, but something more desperate, more urgent. Theodora got up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stay here," she whispered to her son, but Benny was already putting on his slippers. "I'm not going to leave her alone," he replied with a determination that scared her. They went up the stairs on tiptoes, guided by the sobs that came from Katerina's room. The door was ajar, and the scene they found froze Theodora's blood. Arthur was standing next to the bed, visibly staggering, while Katerina cowered in a corner, a trickle of blood running from her nose. On the floor, shards of a broken picture frame, the only one Theodora had ever seen in the girls' room. "You're just like her," Arthur roared. Just like her. The same look of superiority, the same habit of defying me. I'm so sorry, Daddy. Katerina sobbed. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see her picture. She's dead, and it's your fault. Arthur's hand rose again, but before he could bring it down, something unexpected happened. Benny, breaking free from his mother's grip, ran into the room and stood in front of Katerina. Hit me, the boy shouted, his arms open in protection. If you need to hit someone, hit me. Time seemed to freeze. Arthur, with his hand still raised, looked at Benny as if he were seeing a ghost. Theodora was already running to protect her son when something even more surprising happened. Arthur staggered back, his face suddenly pale. Tears, the first Theodora had ever seen in his eyes, began to stream down his face. My God, he murmured, looking at his own hands as if he were seeing them for the first time. My God, what am I doing? He fell to his knees, sobbing, while Theodora took advantage of the moment to pull the two children away from him. Katerina clung to Benny as if her life depended on it. Forgive me, Arthur stammered, still on his knees. Forgive me, daughter. I promise I'll change. I promise I'll never again. But Theodora had seen promises like that before, in her years of nursing, promises made in moments of guilt that dissolved with the light of day. Let's go, she whispered, guiding the children out of the room. In their small room in the annex, Theodora improvised a bed for Katerina next to Benny's. While cleaning the blood from the girl's nose, she noticed that she was still holding something, a piece of the broken picture frame. Can I see? She asked gently. Katerina hesitated for a moment before handing over the crumpled fragment. It was part of the face of a young and beautiful woman, with the same large, expressive eyes as Katerina. But there was something disturbing about the image, a look of barely disguised fear, a smile that seemed forced. Is this your mother? Katerina nodded. She died when I was born. Daddy says it was my fault. No! Benny interrupted vehemently. It's not your fault. My dad left too, but Mom always says it wasn't my fault. Your dad left? Katerina asked timidly. He disappeared, Benny replied, his voice growing small. It's been 3 years. Nobody knows where he is. The two children looked at each other with a mutual understanding that broke Theodora's heart. They were two souls, too young, carrying weights too large. Why can't you have pictures of her? Theodora asked, trying to understand more about the situation. Daddy put them all away after she died. He said looking back hurts too much. But Katerina hesitated, looking nervously at the door. I found this one hidden in an old drawer. I just wanted to know what she was like. Theodora hugged the girl, feeling her small body trembling. There's nothing wrong with wanting to know your mother, honey. But there's something wrong with Daddy, Katerina continued, her voice lowering to a whisper. Sometimes when he drinks, he talks to himself. He asks her for forgiveness. He says he didn't mean to, that it was an accident. An icy chill ran down Theodora's spine. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a terrible way. Mom! Benny called, his breathing starting to get difficult, a clear sign that an asthma attack was approaching. The stress of the situation was affecting him. Theodora quickly grabbed the inhaler from the bedside table, helping her son use the medication. Katerina watched everything with wide eyes. Does it hurt? She asked, worried. Just a little, Benny replied between puffs of the medicine. But I'm used to it. I'm used to pain too, Katerina said so naturally that Theodora felt her heart break. That night, the two children slept together, their small hands intertwined, as if trying to protect each other from the monsters that haunted them, both real and imagined. Theodora remained awake, watching over their sleep while her mind worked furiously. There was something very wrong with the death of Katerina's mother. Arthur's behavior, his drunken words about accidents and forgiveness, the fear in the eyes of the woman in the photograph. Everything pointed to a much darker story than a simple birth gone wrong. A noise at the door startled her. It was an envelope that someone had slipped under it. Inside, there was only a note written in haste. "Not everything is as it seems in this house. If you want to help the girl, look in the basement, but be careful. The walls have eyes and he's always watching." The handwriting was Mrs. Higgins's. The next morning, Arthur acted as if nothing had happened. He sat at the breakfast table impeccably dressed, his tie perfectly aligned, hiding the violent man of the night before. Katerina, back in her usual place, kept her eyes fixed on her plate, her hands trembling slightly as she held her silverware. "I need to travel," he announced dryly. "I'll be gone for 3 days. I expect everything to remain in order during my absence." His gaze lingered on Theodora for a moment too long, a silent threat hanging in the air. Then, surprisingly, he turned to Benny. "Boy!" he called, making the boy swallow hard. "Last night, you showed courage. That's admirable." The compliment came out as if each word hurt. Benny just nodded, his small hand finding Katerina's under the table. As soon as Arthur left, taking with him the suffocating atmosphere that his presence imposed, Theodora began to plan. With him gone for 3 days, it was her chance to investigate. But the cameras, they were everywhere. "Mrs. Higgins," she called, finding the housekeeper in the kitchen, "about the cameras." "System glitch," the woman replied without looking up from what she was doing. "Happens every Thursday, from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., scheduled maintenance." The message was delivered. Theodora would have 1 hour that afternoon to find out what the basement was hiding. Katerina's lessons proceeded normally during the morning. The new piano teacher, less strict than the previous one, even allowed Benny to sit in on the lesson after he returned from school. Seeing the 2 children together, Benny applauding each small progress of Katerina, brought a rare moment of joy to that dark house. At 2:55 p.m., Theodora put her plan into action. "How about a different snack today?" she suggested to the children. "Mrs. Higgins taught me how to make a special chocolate cake." Katerina's eyes widened. "But Daddy doesn't let—" "What the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't grieve over," Theodora winked. "Let's make it our little secret." While the children were distracted in the kitchen with Mrs. Higgins, who had surprisingly become a silent ally, Theodora went down to the basement. The staircase creaked under her feet, and the air grew denser with each step. The basement was a labyrinth of dusty shelves and furniture covered by sheets. The smell of mold and guarded secrets was almost suffocating. Where to start? A metallic glint caught her attention. It was a small key, hanging discreetly on a nail behind a bookshelf. Theodora took it with trembling hands, her heart racing when she noticed that it fit perfectly into the lock of an antique chest hidden in a corner. Inside the chest, she found a shoebox. Its contents made her blood run cold. Yellowed newspaper, clippings, all about the death of Clara Vanderbilt, Katerina's mother. The official version was complications during childbirth, but the headlines suggested other possibilities. Wife of businessman dies in mysterious circumstances. Family demands thorough investigation. Clara Vanderbilt case, unanswered questions. At the bottom of the box, she found a manila envelope. Inside, photos, dozens of them. Clara in different moments, always with that same frightened look that Theodora had seen in the fragment of Katerina's photo. In some, purple marks on her arms were partially visible, under the long sleeves, but it was a small notebook hidden under the photos that made Theodora hold her breath. On the first page, Clara's delicate handwriting. "If something happens to me, the truth needs to be known. Arthur is not who everyone thinks he is, and Katerina, my little Katerina, I need to protect her before it's too late." A noise at the top of the stairs made Theodora jump. Quickly, she put everything back in the chest, except the notebook, which she hid inside her blouse. Her heart was beating so hard that she was sure it could be heard throughout the mansion. "Mrs. Mendez," Mrs. Higgins' voice echoed, "the cameras will be back on in 5 minutes." Hurrying up the stairs, Theodora found the children still in the kitchen, their faces smeared with chocolate, smiling like normal children for the first time since they had arrived at that house. "Mom!" Katerina had never eaten chocolate cake before, Benny exclaimed, indignant at the injustice. Later, after the children were asleep, Theodora locked herself in the bathroom, the only place without cameras, to read Clara's notebook. What? She found there was even worse than she imagined. Clara had documented everything, the abuse, the threats, Arthur's obsessive control. But there was more, much more. In the last pages, written in trembling handwriting, she revealed her most shocking discovery. Katerina was not Arthur's biological daughter. "He forced me to fake the pregnancy," Clara wrote. "The truth is, I can't have children. The years of abuse destroyed that possibility. Arthur arranged an illegal adoption, forged documents, created a whole charade. All because of my family's inheritance. My father's will stipulates that the fortune can only be managed by a direct descendant. Without Katerina, Arthur would lose everything." Clara's last words were a desperate plea. "If anyone finds this, please save my daughter. Arthur has discovered that I intend to denounce him. I'm afraid of what he might do. Katerina is all I have, all I—" The writing ended abruptly there. 2 days later, Clara was dead. A high-pitched scream cut through the silence of the night, making Theodora jump. It came from the children's room. Running down the hall, she found Katerina sitting on the bed, trembling, while Benny tried to calm her down. "It was just a nightmare," he said, holding her hand. "You're safe now." "I saw her," Katerina sobbed. "My mother. She was trying to— Tell me something, but I couldn't hear." Theodora hugged the two of them, Clara's notebook weighing like lead against her chest. How could she protect these children? How could she expose the truth without putting everyone at even greater risk? The sound of a car in the driveway made her blood run cold. Arthur had returned early from his trip. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs. The smell of alcohol arrived before he even appeared at the door. "What's going on here?" His voice thundered down the hall. Theodora placed herself in front of the children, feeling Clara's notebook burning against her skin. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of what would be the longest night of their lives. The smell of alcohol reeked in the air as Arthur staggered down the hall towards them. Theodora could feel Benny and Katerina trembling behind her, their small hands clutching at her blouse. "I asked what's going on here," Arthur roared, his face red with fury and alcohol. "Katerina had a nightmare," Theodora replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear. "I'm just calming the children." "Nightmare?" Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "What kind of nightmare?" With Mom," Katerina whispered, her voice so low that it could barely be heard. Arthur's face changed instantly. All the color drained from his face, and for a moment he looked truly frightened. "What did she say?" he asked, taking a step forward. "In the dream, what did she say?" "Nothing, Daddy. I couldn't hear her." Theodora felt the notebook weigh even more against her chest. Arthur was terrified of the possibility that Clara could in some way reveal his secrets even after death. "Everyone to bed, now!" he ordered, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "And you, nurse, in my office, immediately." Theodora's heart leaped. Had he discovered about her trip to the basement? About the notebook? "Mom!" Benny called, his eyes filled with fear. "It's going to be okay, honey," she said, praying that she wasn't lying. "Stay with Katerina. Don't leave the room." Arthur's office was a suffocating environment with dark wood-paneled walls and a heavy mahogany desk. Theodora remained standing, feeling the cold sweat run down her back as he poured himself another shot of whiskey. "Do you know why I hired you?" he asked finally, without turning around. "To take care of Katerina." "No." He turned around sharply, spilling some of the drink. "I hired you because I saw how your son defended her at the hospital. I saw the loyalty in his eyes. That's what Katerina needs. Loyalty. Someone to keep her in line, to teach her to be obedient." "She's only 6 years old," Theodora protested. 6 years old is old enough to learn her place." Arthur slammed the glass on the table hard. "Clara never understood that. Always spoiling the girl, always." He stopped abruptly, as if he had said too much. "Do you mean always being a good mother?" Theodora ventured, her heart pounding. "Good mother?" Arthur laughed bitterly. "Clara was weak. She didn't understand that we need to be tough on children to prepare them for the world. And now—" He approached Theodora, his hot breath of alcohol making her eyes burn. "Now you're following in her footsteps." "I don't know what you're talking about." "No, the chocolate cake this afternoon. Do you think I don't know what happens in my own house?" He grabbed Theodora's arm tightly. "The cameras may have been off, but I have eyes everywhere." Theodora felt her blood run cold. He knew about the scheduled maintenance. He knew it was an opportunity to explore the house. "Katerina needs discipline," he continued, squeezing her arm harder. "She needs to learn that she can't trust anyone but me, that only I—" A high-pitched scream cut through his speech. It came from upstairs. "Benny!" Theodora shouted, breaking free from Arthur's grip and running towards the door. The scene she found in the children's room made her heart stop. Benny was on the floor, struggling to breathe, an asthma attack stronger than normal taking over his small body. Katerina was kneeling beside him, crying desperately. "The inhaler!" Theodora shouted. "Where's the inhaler?" "It's empty," Katerina sobbed. "He used the last dose trying to calm me down from the nightmare." Theodora ran to her room, frantically rummaging through her bag in search of the spare medication. Nothing. The stock she always kept had run out, and the salary that Arthur had promised had not yet been paid so that she could buy more. "We need to take him to the hospital," she shouted, picking up her son in her arms. "No one's going anywhere." Arthur's voice sounded behind her, cold and calculating despite the drink. "Not without my permission. He needs medical attention, and he'll get it when I decide he deserves it." It was then that something unexpected happened. Katerina, the small and frightened Katerina, stood up and faced her father. "You always say I'm just like Mom," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "So I'm going to be like her now. I'm going to do what she would do." Before anyone could stop her, Katerina ran to the phone in the hallway and dialed 3 numbers. "Emergency," she said clearly. "I need an ambulance at the Vanderbilt mansion. A boy is dying." Arthur's face transformed into a mask of fury. He advanced towards his daughter, but this time it was Theodora who stood in his way. "If you touch a hair on her head," she said between her teeth, still holding Benny, who was struggling to breathe, "I swear everyone will know what happened to Clara." The words came out before she could think. For a moment, the fear in Arthur's eyes confirmed everything that was written in the notebook hidden in her blouse. "You don't know anything," he whispered. "I know enough." The distant sound of a siren broke the impasse. Arthur retreated, running his hands over his face, now covered in sweat. "This isn't over," he murmured, before disappearing into his office, locking the door. At the hospital, while Benny received the necessary treatment, Theodora held Katerina in her lap. The girl had refused to stay at the mansion, even with Mrs. Higgins offering to take care of her. "Your mum would be proud of you," Theodora whispered, stroking the girl's hair. "How do you know?" Katerina asked sleepily. Theodora squeezed the notebook hidden in her blouse. Because she was brave too. Brave like you. But as the two watched Benny finally breathe more easily, Theodora knew that the real battle was just beginning. Arthur would not forgive the affront of this night, and now that he knew she had discovered something about Clara, things would get even more dangerous. On the other side of the emergency room glass, a familiar figure caught her attention. It was Mrs. Higgins, her expression more grave than usual. "He's destroying everything," the housekeeper whispered as soon as Theodora approached. "All the boxes in the basement, all the papers. He's burning everything." Theodora pressed the notebook against her chest, thanking silently for having brought it with her. It was her only proof, her only chance to save Katerina. But as she watched the girl finally fall asleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, a cruel doubt consumed her. How much longer would she be able to protect these two children? And what would be the price to pay for trying? The morning arrived cold and grey at the hospital in Willow Creek. Theodora hadn't slept, dividing her attention between Benny, who was finally resting after the crisis, and Katerina, who refused to let go of her hand even during her sleep. The hospital breakfast arrived on plastic trays, watery oatmeal and dry bread. Katerina looked at the food with curiosity, as if she had never seen something so simple. "It's different from what you're used to, right?" Benny asked, already more recovered. "It's better," she replied surprisingly. "Here nobody's watching me to see if I'm eating right." The innocent comment broke Theodora's heart. But before she could answer, a nurse rushed into the room. "Theodora, someone's looking for you, said it's urgent." It was Mrs. Higgins, looking like she had aged 10 years in one night. "He's coming," the housekeeper whispered, pulling Theodora into a corner. "And he's not alone." "What do you mean?" "He brought the new hospital administrator with him. The conversation I overheard." "Theodora, he's going to try to take your son out of here before he's discharged." Panic began to rise in Theodora's throat. "He can't do that." "He can. His mining company is the biggest donor to the hospital, and there's more." Mrs. Higgins hesitated, looking around before continuing. "I heard something about turning the hospital into a luxury hotel. It seems he's been planning this for months." "But what about the people who depend on the hospital? It's the only one in the region." "Since when does Arthur Vanderbilt care about people?" A murmur in the hallway announced his arrival. Theodora ran back to the room, closing the door. "Mom?" Benny called, noticing her panic. "What's wrong?" Before she could answer, the door opened. Arthur entered, impeccably dressed in his expensive suit, followed by a stern-faced woman in a blue pantsuit. "Good morning," he said with artificial calm. "This is Dr. Regina, the new hospital administrator. She came to personally assess your son's case." The woman approached the bed, flipping through a clipboard. "According to the reports, it was just a mild asthma attack. I see no need for prolonged hospitalization." "Mild?" Theodora protested. "He almost couldn't breathe." "Mrs. Mendez," Regina interrupted coldly, "as a healthcare professional, you should know that we need the beds for more serious cases. And speaking of professional," she consulted some papers. "It says here that you abandoned your post at the hospital without prior notice. That's a serious violation of the Code of Ethics." "She didn't abandon anything," Mrs. Higgins defended from the door. "She was forced to—" "Silence," Arthur cut her off, then turning to Theodora with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I came to pick up my daughter, and to suggest that you take the opportunity to pack your things at the mansion. Your services will no longer be needed." "No!" Katerina shouted, clinging to Theodora. "I don't want to go!" "Quiet," Arthur hissed, grabbing the girl's arm. It was then that something unexpected happened. The door to the room opened again, and a familiar figure entered. Janine, the social worker that Theodora knew from her time at the hospital. "Let go of that girl now," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "And who are you to—" "Someone who just witnessed a scene of child abuse," Janine replied, already pulling out her cell phone. "Do you want me to call the authorities, or can we talk civilly?" Arthur released Katerina, his face red with contained rage. "Mrs. Higgins called me," Janine explained to Theodora, "and brought some interesting documents." She took a folder from her bag. For example, the original records of Katerina's birth, or rather, the absence of them. The color drained from Arthur's face. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. "No? Then maybe you'd like to explain why there's no record of Clara Vanderbilt having been admitted to any maternity ward on the date of Katerina's supposed birth, or why the doctor who signed the birth certificate doesn't exist on the Regional Medical Council roster." "This is ridiculous," Regina intervened. "Mr. Vanderbilt is a respectable citizen who's about to turn the only public hospital in the region into a hotel," Janine completed. "Yes, I also found out about that. Interesting how the timing coincides with Theodora's arrival here, isn't it?" Theodora felt Clara's notebook weigh in her blouse. It was her time. "There's more," she said, taking out the notebook. "Clara left a record of everything." "Shut your mouth," Arthur roared, advancing towards her. But Benny was faster. Even still weak, he jumped out of bed and placed himself in front of his mother. "Don't touch her!" the boy shouted. "Don't you ever touch anyone here again?" The boy's courageous gesture made Arthur stop. For a moment something passed through his eyes. Regret? Fear? Before his mask of coldness returned to its place. "This isn't over," he murmured, retreating towards the door. "You have no idea of the power I have in this town." "And you have no idea of the power of the truth," Janine replied. "I suggest you think carefully about your next step." After Arthur left, dragging a visibly confused Regina with him, the room fell into a heavy silence. "What happens now?" Katerina asked in a low voice. "Now," Janine replied gently, "we're going to protect you and discover the whole truth about your story." Theodora hugged the two little ones, feeling their hearts beat fast against her chest. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time since entering that mansion, she felt that she was no longer alone. "Mom," Benny called sleepily, the medicine starting to take effect again. "We're going to be okay, right?" "Yes, my love," she replied, praying that she was right. Now, sleep. But as the children finally slept, Theodora couldn't shake the feeling that Arthur wouldn't give up so easily. What else would he be capable of doing to keep his secrets buried? And what other mysteries did Clara's notebook still hold? Outside the hospital, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, foreshadowing a storm. The town of Willow Creek was about to face turbulent days, and at the center of it all, two children whose lives had been marked by lies and violence were struggling to find some peace. The rain lashed against the windows of Janine's small apartment, where Theodora and the children had found temporary refuge. It was a cramped but cozy place, the opposite of the cold Vanderbilt mansion. "Are you sure we're not bothering you?" Theodora asked for the 10th time, helping the social worker improvise mattresses in the living room. "Absolutely," Janine replied, distributing blankets. "This is safer than anywhere else for now." Benny and Katerina were already asleep on the couch, hugging each other as if trying to protect one another even in their sleep. The boy was still breathing with a slight wheeze, but he was much better than the night before. "We need to read the rest," Janine said, pointing to Clara's notebook that Theodora wouldn't let go of. "There may be more important information there." The two women sat at the kitchen table, a cup of strong coffee between them. Theodora opened the notebook with trembling hands, continuing from where she had left off. "Arthur is getting more aggressive. Read an entry dated 3 months before Clara's death. I think he suspects that I've discovered the truth about the adoption scheme. Today, I found him rummaging through my papers, but he won't find anything. I've hidden the evidence in a safe place. What evidence would that be? Janine murmured. The answer came a few pages later. I managed to get copies of the real documents, Katerina's original birth certificate, the payments made to the fake biological mother, everything. If something happens to me, it's all kept with someone I trust. But who? Theodora questioned. And why hasn't this person come forward? A particularly loud clap of thunder made the children stir in their sleep. Katerina let out a small moan, and Benny, even sleeping, pulled her closer. Maybe, Janine began, her eyes widening with a sudden realization. Theodora, you said your husband disappeared 3 years ago, right? Yes, but what does that have to do? When exactly? Theodora frowned, trying to remember the exact date. It was in March 15th. Janine quickly flipped through the notebook to the last pages. Look at this. I gave everything to Roberto today. He promised to keep it safe. Theodora's blood ran cold. The entry was dated March 14th, one day before her husband's disappearance. No, she whispered, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. It can't be. What did your husband do for a living? He was an accountant. He did the accounting for several small businesses in the area. And did any of those businesses have ties to Arthur Vanderbilt? Theodora felt the pieces falling into place in a terrible way. Roberto mentioned once, said he had discovered something irregular in the accounts of a large company. He was nervous, worried, but he didn't want to tell me anything else to protect me. And the next day, he disappeared. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the sound of the rain and the soft breathing of the children. My God, Theodora murmured, tears beginning to stream down her face. All this time, Roberto disappeared because of this, because of Katerina's documents. It makes sense, Janine said gently. Clara must have sought out your husband because he was an accountant, someone who would understand the importance of the documents. And Arthur found out, Theodora completed, feeling a wave of nausea. How could I have been so blind? 3 years looking for answers, and they were there all along. A noise in the living room interrupted the conversation. Benny was awake, his eyes wide in the dark. Mom, he called with a trembling voice. Are you crying? Theodora quickly wiped away her tears, but it was too late. The boy was already by her side, his small arms wrapping her in a tight hug. Is it because of Dad? He asked. Did you find out where he is? How could she explain to a 10-year-old that his father had probably been a victim of the same man, who was now threatening their lives? Not yet, my love, she replied, kissing the top of his head. But we're closer to understanding what happened. He's coming back, right? The innocent question broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. Before she could answer, another clap of thunder shook the windows, and Katerina woke up scared. Where's Daddy? The girl shouted in panic. Is he angry? No, honey, Theodora soothed, running to hug her too. You're safe here. Janine watched the scene with teary eyes. I'm going to make hot chocolate for everyone, she said, getting up. I don't think anyone's going to sleep anymore anyway. While the social worker prepared the drink, Theodora held the 2 children, feeling their small hearts beating against her chest. How could 2 lives so young carry so much fear? Aunt Janine, Benny called after a while, his voice sleepy. Why do adults hurt children? The question caught everyone by surprise. Janine stopped stirring the chocolate, and Theodora felt her heart clench. Because some adults are hurt inside, Katerina replied before anyone could say anything. That's what Mom wrote in her notebook. Theodora and Janine exchanged surprised glances. You read the notebook? Theodora asked gently. Just a little bit, the girl admitted. When you were sleeping at the hospital. Mom wrote that Dad was hurt. When he was little too. That's why he doesn't know how to love right. The wisdom of that 6-year-old was devastating. But that doesn't justify it, Janine said firmly, pouring the hot chocolate into colorful mugs. Nothing justifies hurting someone we love. A new clap of thunder made the lights flicker and finally go out, leaving the apartment in darkness. In the silence that followed, they could hear loud voices coming from the street. "It's him," Katerina whispered in panic. "He found us." But when Janine peeked out the window, she saw something different. A group of people were gathering in front of the hospital, protesting against its closure. The news of the sale to turn it into a hotel had spread quickly. "The whole town is against him now," Janine said, returning to them. "Maybe it's our chance." She was interrupted by loud knocks on the door. Theodora pulled the children closer, while Janine grabbed her cell phone to light the way to the entrance. "Who is it?" she asked. "Mrs. Higgins." A familiar and breathless voice replied. "Quick, I need to show you something before it's too late." Mrs. Higgins entered the apartment soaked from the rain, carrying an old folder protected by a plastic bag. Her normally stern face was marked by an urgency that Theodora had never seen before. "He's gone crazy," the housekeeper said, still trying to catch her breath. "He's destroying everything at the mansion, burning documents, breaking furniture. But I managed to save this before." She opened the folder with trembling hands, spreading papers on the kitchen table. By the light of the candles that Janine had lit, the yellowed documents told a story that made Theodora's blood run cold. "These are the financial records of the Vanderbilt family," Mrs. Higgins explained. "I kept copies of everything over the years. I always knew they would be needed one day." "Why did you never say anything?" Theodora asked. "Why did you let things get to this point?" The housekeeper sat down heavily, looking even older under the flickering candlelight. "Because I promised Clara. She made me swear that I would only reveal all this if I found someone who could really protect Katerina, someone like you, Theodora." The children, who were watching everything in silence from the couch, approached curiously. "Mrs. Higgins," Katerina called timidly, "did you know my mother for real?" The innocent question made the housekeeper choke back tears. "Yes, dear. Your biological mother was a very poor young woman who worked at the textile factory. Arthur found her when she was pregnant and desperate. He offered her money, a lot of money, for her to hand over the baby as soon as it was born." "And Clara?" Janine questioned, flipping through the documents. "How did she get into this story?" "Clara couldn't have children because of the abuse she suffered from Arthur, but her father's will was clear. The fortune would only be released if she had an heir, so Arthur orchestrated the whole plan, the fake pregnancy, the illegal adoption, the forged documents." Theodora felt her heart clench as she saw Katerina's eyes fill with tears. Benny, noticing his friend's sadness, held her hand. "But Clara loved you, honey," Mrs. Higgins continued gently. "From the first moment she held you in her arms, you became her whole life. That's why she started gathering evidence against Arthur. She wanted to protect you, to make sure that the fortune your grandfather left was really yours." "And what happened to the lady who had me?" Katerina asked. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Higgins exchanged a meaningful look with Janine before answering. "She disappeared shortly after giving birth. Arthur took care of that too." Theodora felt a shiver run down her spine. How many lives had that man destroyed to maintain his empire of lies? "There's more," Mrs. Higgins said, taking a manila envelope from the folder. "I found this hidden in the lining of Clara's room. They're pictures. The photographs showed Clara at different moments with Katerina as a baby. In all of them, despite the visible fear in her eyes, there was an overflowing love in her smile as she held her daughter. "Look, Mom," Benny said, pointing to one of the photos. "There's a man here in the background. He looks like—" Theodora took the photo with trembling hands. There it was, partially visible in a corner of the image, the face that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. Roberto. Your husband was the accountant that Clara trusted, Mrs. Higgins confirmed. He discovered the irregularities in the accounts, the diverted money, everything. Clara handed over all the evidence to him on the day before he disappeared, Theodora completed, feeling the tears stream down her face. That's why Arthur made him disappear, to protect his secrets. A particularly loud clap of thunder made the windows shudder. On the street, the protests in front of the hospital were getting louder. What now? Benny asked, his voice small in the dark. What's going to happen to us? Before anyone could answer, violent knocks on the door made everyone freeze. Police! A gruff voice announced. Open immediately. He wouldn't, Janine murmured, incredulous. He wouldn't be capable. He would, Mrs. Higgins replied bitterly. Arthur has the local police in his pocket. He probably made up some story about child abduction. Theodora hugged the children, her brain working frantically. They couldn't let Katerina go back to that monster, not after everything they had discovered. There's a back exit, Janine whispered, already collecting the documents. Through Mrs. Zepha's backyard. She'll help, she always helps. The knocks on the door were getting stronger, threatening to break down the fragile wood. Go, Mrs. Higgins ordered. I'll distract them. I'm old enough that they won't dare hurt me. But, no buts. Take the children, and Theodora. The housekeeper held her hands tightly. Clara left a letter for Katerina. It's hidden in the abandoned chapel behind the hospital, under the 3rd pew on the right. Get that letter. It's the last piece of evidence you need. As Janine guided everyone to the back exit, Theodora looked one last time at Mrs. Higgins. The old housekeeper was standing erect and dignified, ready to face yet another battle. The rain continued to fall mercilessly as they ran through the dark alleys of Willow Creek. Benny began to wheeze, his asthma reacting to the effort and humidity. Hold on tight, my love, Theodora whispered, carrying him in her arms while Janine did the same with Katerina. Behind them, they could hear raised voices and the sound of things being broken in the apartment. What would happen to Mrs. Higgins? What other truths would that night still reveal? The abandoned chapel loomed ahead of them like a ghost in the darkness, its peeling walls, silent witnesses to so many secrets. As they approached Clara's last message, Theodora could only pray that it wasn't too late. The abandoned chapel smelled of mold and forgotten memories. The rain entered through holes in the roof, forming puddles on the worn stone floor. Janine used her cell phone flashlight to light the way to the 3rd pew on the right, while Theodora tried to calm Benny's panting breath. Mom, he whispered between wheezes, it's hard. I know, my love. Just a little bit more. Katerina, still in Janine's arms, watched everything with wide eyes. Mum used to come here, she said suddenly. I remembered she would bring me secretly from Daddy. The pew was partially destroyed by time, but still kept firm on its old wooden base. Janine knelt down, running her hands along the underside, until she found something. Here, she exclaimed, pulling out a sealed envelope protected by plastic. Katerina's name was written on the front, in the delicate handwriting that Theodora already knew from Clara's notebook. But before they could open it, distant voices echoed down the street. They must have gone to the chapel, someone shouted. Surround the area. Quick, Janine whispered, guiding them to a side door. There's a passage that leads to the back of the hospital. The doctors used to use it to handle emergencies. The corridor was narrow and damp, lit only by the weak light of the cell phone. The stone walls seemed to close in on them, and the sound of Benny's labored breathing echoed eerily. I can't, he gasped, his legs failing. Come on, champ, Janine said, passing Katerina to Theodora and picking up the boy in her arms. Let me carry you. They reached a small iron door at the end of the corridor. On the other side, the back of the hospital was deserted. All the employees probably still focused on the protest in front of the building. "Where are we going?" Theodora asked, feeling Katerina tremble in her arms. "To the only place Arthur wouldn't think to look," Janine replied. "The old folks' home." St. Francis' home was a few blocks from the hospital, a simple but well-maintained building where family-less elderly people found shelter. Sister Mary, the nun who ran the place, asked no questions upon seeing the soaking wet group at her door. "Come," she said, guiding them through silent corridors. "There's an empty room at the end of the hall." After settling the children into makeshift beds and getting a spare asthma inhaler for Benny, they could finally focus on the envelope. "Want me to read it to you?" Theodora asked Katerina gently. The girl nodded, grabbing Benny's hand as if she needed support for what was to come. "My beloved daughter," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means that you've finally found someone brave enough to help you discover the truth. And it also means that I'm no longer there to protect you." Theodora paused, her voice faltering. Janine gestured for her to continue. "First, I want you to know that love has nothing to do with blood. From the first moment I saw you, you were my daughter. In my heart, you always will be. But there are truths you need to know. Your father, Arthur, is not your biological father, nor am I your biological mother. You came to us through a terrible agreement, an agreement that haunts me every day. Your real mother's name was Maria. She was a simple girl who worked at the factory. Arthur found her when she was pregnant and desperate and offered her money for her to hand over the baby." Katerina sobbed softly, and Benny squeezed her hand harder. "I couldn't have children because of the abuse I suffered. Arthur needed an heir to control the fortune that my father left. So he set up this whole plan, the fake pregnancy, the forged documents, everything. At first, I accepted. I was so hurt, so desperate to please him. But then you were born. Seeing you for the first time changed everything. Suddenly I understood that I needed to be strong, not for myself, but for you. I started saving evidence, documents, anything that could one day protect you from him. Maria disappeared shortly after giving birth. Arthur said she had left with the money, but I never believed it. He's always been good at making people disappear." Theodora felt a chill as she thought of Roberto. "Your grandfather's will, my father, stipulates that all of the family's fortune must pass to his only grandson or granddaughter. Arthur can only manage the money while he's your legal guardian. That's why he forged your birth certificate, putting his name as the biological father. But now you know the truth. There's a bank account in your name, protected until you turn 18. Arthur doesn't know about it. My father created it in secret, suspicious of the son-in-law he had. The documents that prove all of this are with someone I trust." "Roberto," Theodora whispered. "If something happens to me," the letter continued, "look for the accountant Roberto Mendez. He has all the evidence. And if he's also no longer there, look for his wife, Theodora. She's a nurse at County General. I've always watched how she treats the children who come in hurt. She'll understand. She'll help you." Katerina looked up surprised. You already knew about me." "No, honey," Theodora replied, tears running freely. "Your mother chose me without me knowing, like a guardian angel choosing another to continue her work. My beloved daughter," the letter continued, "I know you must be scared and confused, but always remember, you are stronger than you think. You are loved, not for your money, not for your name, but for your pure heart and your gentle soul. And now you have a new chance to find the family you deserve. All the love in the world, forever, Mom." The silence that followed was broken only by Katerina's soft sobs. Benny hugged her, and soon Theodora and Janine joined the collective hug. "What happens now?" Benny asked after a while. A noise at the door made everyone freeze. Sister Mary entered in a hurry, her normally serene face marked by worry. "Arthur Vanderbilt is here," she announced, "and he brought the police." St. Francis' home, normally a place of peace and quiet, now felt like a besieged fortress. Through the windows of the room, they could see the lights of the patrol cars reflecting in the puddles of rain. "Is there a back exit?" Janine asked Sister Mary. The nun shook her head. "They've surrounded everything, and the elderly are scared by all this commotion." Theodora held the children close to her, feeling their small hearts beat fast. Clara's letter was still in her hands, now crumpled from the force with which she was squeezing it. "We can't run forever," she said finally. "At some point we need to face this." "But how?" Janine questioned. "He has the police on his side." A determined glint appeared in Theodora's eyes. "There's something he doesn't know we have." Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, getting closer. Authoritative voices ordered the doors to be opened. "Sister," Theodora called quickly, "do you have a phone we can use? Mine's still in Janine's apartment." The nun took an old cell phone from her habit pocket. "It's not very good, but it works." Theodora quickly dialed a number. After 3 agonizing rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Dr. Evans, this is Theodora, the nurse from the hospital. Remember the case you helped me with 3 years ago, about my husband?" On the other end of the line, the old retired prosecutor seemed to wake up completely. "Of course I remember. My dear, we never got enough evidence at the time. Now we have," she interrupted, "all of it, but I need your help, urgent." While Theodora quickly explained the situation, the knocks on the room door began. "Police! Open immediately!" Katerina huddled in Benny's arms, who, even scared, tried to look strong to protect his friend. "We're going to open," Theodora said, hanging up the phone. "But first, we need you two to do exactly what we agreed on." Janine and Sister Mary nodded, each holding firmly onto a part of the documents that could change everything. When the door was finally opened, Arthur Vanderbilt burst into the room like a storm, followed by 2 police officers. His normally controlled face was contorted with fury. "Where's my daughter?" he roared. Katerina, trembling but standing firm as Clara had predicted in the letter, took a step forward. "I'm not your daughter," she said, her voice small but clear. "Mum's letter explained everything." Arthur's face paled for a moment, but quickly recovered its composure. "What nonsense is this? What letter?" "The letter that Clara left," Theodora replied, "explaining about the illegal adoption, about Maria, Katerina's real mother, about how you forged documents to gain access to the inheritance." "Lies!" he roared, advancing threateningly. "You have no proof of anything." "We have all the proof," Janine intervened. "The original documents that Clara gave to Roberto before he mysteriously disappeared. The financial records that Mrs. Higgins kept for years. And now, the letter." "Mrs. Higgins," Arthur murmured, a vein throbbing in his forehead. "That old traitor." "She was loyal to the end," Theodora said, "loyal to the promise she made to Clara to protect Katerina." The police officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "This is ridiculous," Arthur said, forcing a laugh. "Officers, arrest this woman for child abduction." "Not so fast," a stern voice sounded from the door. Everyone turned to see Dr. Evans entering the room, accompanied by 2 federal agents. The old retired prosecutor limped slightly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes shone with the force of justice that he had pursued throughout his career. "I've been waiting 3 years to solve the disappearance of Roberto Mendez," he said. "Now we finally have all the pieces of the puzzle." "You have no jurisdiction here," protested one of the local police officers. "But they do," Evans replied, pointing to the federal agents, "and they're very interested in a series of documents that they just received by email. Isn't that right, Janine?" The social worker smiled. putting her cell phone in her pocket. The evidence that Sister Mary had just photographed and sent was already safe. "This is absurd," Arthur shouted, his control finally breaking. "You can't—" "I can," Evans interrupted. "And do you know why? Because 3 years ago, when Roberto disappeared, he came to me first. He told me everything about the documents that Clara had entrusted to him. But we didn't have enough evidence at the time. Now we do." Arthur's face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. His eyes darted frantically around the room like a cornered animal looking for escape. "Katerina!" he called, trying one last resort. "Daughter, you can't believe these people. Everything I did was for you, to give you a better life." "No," the girl replied, tears streaming down her face. "Mom Clara gave me love. You only gave me fear." It was as if those words had broken something inside Arthur. His legs buckled, and he fell sitting on the nearest bed, looking suddenly very old and very small. "You gentlemen have a lot to explain at the station," said one of the federal agents, already taking out the handcuffs. As Arthur was led away, still in a state of shock, Theodora hugged the children. It was finally over, or almost. "Dr. Evans," she called, "about Roberto." The old prosecutor sighed heavily. "Now that we have Arthur in custody, we can reopen the investigation. We're going to find the truth, Theodora, I promise." Benny, who had remained strong throughout the confrontation, finally let the tears fall. "Dad," he whispered to the emptiness. "We did it. We finally did it." The rain outside was beginning to subside, and the first rays of sunlight of the morning broke through the clouds. A new light for a new beginning. But while everyone breathed a sigh of relief, no one noticed the piece of paper that fell from Arthur's pocket as he was led away. A paper that contained one last secret, a secret that would change everything again. The dawn found everyone exhausted at St. Francis's home. Sister Mary had improvised coffee and bread in the small pantry, and the smell of fresh coffee brought an almost surreal sense of normalcy after the turbulent night. Benny and Katerina had finally fallen asleep, wrapped in blankets on the living room couch. Theodora watched them, marveling at the children's ability to find peace even after so much chaos. "I found this on the floor," Janine said, approaching, with a folded piece of paper in her hands. "It must have fallen from Arthur's pocket when they took him away." Theodora took the paper carefully. It was an old receipt from a roadside diner just outside of Willow Creek. On the back, there was a handwritten note. "RM, every 15th, 11 a.m. Don't forget meds." "RM," Theodora murmured, her heart racing. "Roberto Mendez." "And today is the 15th. Janine observed, checking her watch. In 2 hours, Theodora felt her legs weaken. For 3 years, she had imagined 1,000 scenarios about her husband's disappearance. Now, she held in her hands what could be the lead she had been looking for. "But why would Arthur keep this?" she questioned. "And what meds are these?" "There's a way to find out," Janine replied. "But we need to be quick." "The children, they can stay with me," offered Sister Mary, who had approached silently. "Here, they will be safe." The journey to the diner was made in tense silence. Dr. Evans had insisted on accompanying them, following in his own car right behind. "We still don't know what Arthur is capable of," he argued. The diner was a simple roadside establishment, the kind that serves strong coffee and buttered bread to truckers. A faded sign announced "Zephyrs Eats" in letters that were almost illegible. 10:50, Janine announced, checking her watch once more. Theodora felt her heart beating so hard that she was sure everyone could hear it. Her hands trembled as she held the crumpled receipt. An elderly woman was wiping the tables with a worn cloth. Her wrinkled face lit up with a smile upon seeing the customers arriving. "Good morning," she greeted. "What can I get for you?" "Mrs. Zephyr?" Theodora ventured. The woman's smile wavered for a moment. "It's been a while since someone called me that. Ever since I sold the diner to your Arthur, everyone calls me Mrs. Johnson. Mr. Arthur Vanderbilt owns this place? He does. Bought it about 3 years ago. Said it was an investment, but he never changed anything. Just demanded that I keep working here and that I serve coffee and medicine every 15th to the sick man. Theodora felt the air leave her lungs. What man? As if answering her question, the back door opened. A thin man, with unshaven beard and lost eyes, staggered inside. Theodora felt her legs give way. Roberto? The man stopped, blinking confused. Against the light coming through the window, his eyes, previously unfocused, seemed to gain a glimmer of recognition. Theodora. She ran to him, her legs barely supporting her weight. Roberto was different, thinner, with graying hair despite being only 45 years old, and an absent expression that she had never seen before. "What did they do to you?" she whispered, touching his face with trembling hands. "The meds," Mrs. Johnson replied, her voice laden with guilt. "Every 15th, your Arthur would have me deliver medicine along with the coffee. Said it was for his treatment, that he was sick in the head, threatened to close the diner if I didn't obey." Dr. Evans, who had entered silently, picked up one of the pills that were on the counter. "These are very strong tranquilizers," he said, examining the medication. "The kind of thing that keeps a person confused, unable to think clearly." He kept me drugged," Roberto murmured, his voice hoarse as if it hadn't been used for a long time. "After I discovered Clara's documents, he brought me here. Said that if I tried to escape, he would hurt you and Benny." Theodora hugged him, feeling his fragile body tremble against hers. 3 years, 3 long years, living as a prisoner in his own mind, just a few miles from home. "Benny," Roberto whispered. "How is he? He must be so big." "He's beautiful," Theodora replied through tears, "and strong. So strong, my love. You would be proud." "The documents," he said suddenly, his voice gaining a bit more clarity. I hid them before he caught me. In the place you always said was our special spot." Theodora held her breath. "The tree of our first kiss." Roberto nodded weakly. "Underneath it, in a metal box." Janine was already on the phone with the federal police, passing on the coordinates. In a matter of minutes, another piece of the puzzle would be recovered. "Let's get him to the hospital," Dr. Evans said. "He needs proper medical care, detoxification." But before they could leave, Roberto grabbed Theodora's arm with surprising strength. "There's more," he said, his eyes regaining a glimmer of lucidity. "Something I saw in the documents about Katerina's real mother. She didn't disappear like everyone thinks." A heavy silence fell over the diner. "What do you mean?" Theodora asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Maria," Roberto continued, each word seeming to cost him a tremendous effort. "She's closer than everyone imagines. And Arthur made sure she could never tell the truth." Theodora turned slowly to the woman who was watching everything with silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. The woman who everyone knew as Mrs. Johnson, but whose real name she realized now was Maria. Katerina's real mother had been there all along, serving coffee on the side of the road, watching from afar as Arthur Vanderbilt destroyed more and more lives. Mrs. Johnson, or Maria, fell sitting in one of the diner chairs, her wrinkled hands trembling as she covered her face. "Forgive me," she sobbed. "Forgive me for never saying anything. He threatened to hurt her if I tried to get close. Said he had people watching, that he would know if I said anything." Theodora knelt beside the woman, holding her hands. "Why didn't you leave? Why did you stay here so close?" "How could I leave?" Maria replied, raising her teary eyes. "Here I could at least see her from time to time when he brought her to eat on the road. It was the most I could do, see my little girl grow up, even if from afar." Roberto, still staggering, leaned on the counter. In the documents, there was a contract. Arthur bought the diner and forced her to keep working here. It was a way to keep her under control, and also to torture me, the woman completed. Make me serve him coffee, listen to him brag about how Katerina was being well raised, how she had a princess's life. Her voice failed, while I saw the bruises she tried to hide. Janine, who had finished talking to the federal police, approached. You need to tell all of this officially. Your testimony could be crucial to the case. I don't know if I have that courage, Maria murmured. You had the courage to stay here all these years just to be close to your daughter, Theodora said, softly. Now it's time to fight for her openly. A sound of a car parking made everyone turn around. It was Sister Mary, and in the back seat, Benny woke up scared, explained the nun, helping the children out of the car. I couldn't convince them to stay at the home. Benny ran into the diner, stopping abruptly upon seeing the man leaning on the counter. Dad! He called, his voice small and uncertain. Roberto staggered towards his son, falling to his knees. My boy! The hug between father and son made everyone present wipe away tears, but it was Katerina, standing in the doorway, who made the next moment freeze in time. The girl stared fixedly at Maria, as if something in her heart recognized what her mind didn't yet know. I remember you, she said finally. You always put an extra cookie on my plate, hidden from Daddy. Maria sobbed, her hands covering her mouth. And you always sang that song, Katerina continued, taking a step forward. The one that Mom Clara also sang, to me afterwards. Hush, little darling, don't say a word, Maria whispered. Mama's going to buy you a mockingbird, completed Katerina, her eyes filling with tears. How did you know that was my favorite song? Because, Theodora replied gently, she was the first person to sing that song to you, dear, before you were even born. Katerina looked confused from Theodora to Maria, her 6-year-old mind trying to process what that meant. When you were still in my belly, Maria explained with a trembling voice, I sang that song every day. I talked to you, told you stories, dreamed of the day I could hold you in my arms. You are, yes, my girl, I'm your first mom. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Maria's muffled sobs. Katerina remained motionless, processing the revelation. It was Benny who, still embraced by his father, broke the moment of tension. That means you have 2 moms who love you, he said simply. Mom Clara, who took care of you even knowing that the bad man could hurt her, and now Mrs. Johnson, who stayed this whole time close by just to be able to see you grow up. The innocent wisdom of the child struck everyone like a wave of clarity. Katerina took another step forward, then another, until she was very close to Maria. Did you also make chocolate chip cookies in secret? She asked timidly. I did, Maria replied, breaking into a smile through her tears. And I still do. Want to try one? As the woman got up to go to the kitchen, her legs still trembling with emotion, Theodora watched the scene with a heavy heart. How many lives had Arthur destroyed in his obsession with power and money? How many families had he broken apart? Roberto, still embraced by Benny, seemed to begin to awaken from the chemical stupor that had kept him prisoner for 3 years. The documents, he said suddenly, we need to get them. They prove everything, the illegal adoption, the threats to Maria, the embezzlement of the inheritance. The federal police are already on their way to the tree, Janine informed. We'll have everything soon, but something in Roberto's tone made Theodora frown. There's something else, isn't there? She asked, knowing her husband's expressions too well. There is, he replied, his voice gaining strength. Something that not even Clara knew when she gave me the documents. Something I found when I was investigating the accounts. Before he could continue, the sound of several cars parking abruptly interrupted the conversation. Through the diner window, they saw patrol cars from the federal police and an official car from the district attorney's office. It's them, Dr. Evans said. "Now we'll find out the whole truth." But as the agents entered the diner, Theodora couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more revelations to come. What else had Roberto discovered in Arthur's accounts? What other secret was still hidden in the documents buried under the tree of their first kiss? In the kitchen, they could hear Caterina laughing at the stories that Maria was telling as she prepared cookies. It was a sound of healing, of new beginnings, but it was also a reminder of how much time had been stolen from them, and how many other lives still needed to be repaired. The old tree that witnessed Theodora and Roberto's first kiss still stood majestically on top of the hill, its leaves swaying gently in the morning breeze. The location, once a meeting point for lovers, was now surrounded by federal agents who were carefully excavating under its roots. "It was here," Roberto said, his voice firmer after receiving the first emergency medical care. "I buried the box deep between these two big roots." Benny didn't let go of his father, holding his hand as if he feared he might disappear again. Caterina remained close to Maria, still shy, but already demonstrating an instinctive connection with her biological mother. "We found it," announced one of the agents, raising a rusty metal box. Everyone approached as the object was carefully opened. Inside, protected by plastic bags, was a pile of surprisingly well-preserved documents. "These are the originals," Roberto explained, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the papers. "Caterina's real birth certificate, the contract that Arthur made Maria sign." "And this?" Janine asked, pointing to a red folder at the bottom of the box. Roberto paled. "Those are the proofs of what I discovered in the accounts, the reason why Arthur kept me alive, even if drugged. He needed my signature on some documents from time to time." "What documents?" Dr. Evans questioned, flipping through the folder carefully. "Transfers," Roberto replied, "from the inheritance that should be Caterina's to accounts overseas. As I was the company's official accountant, only my signature could validate certain transactions." Theodora felt her heart clench. For 3 years, her husband had been kept in chemical captivity, forced to participate in a scheme that he himself had tried to denounce. "But there's more," Roberto continued, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "Something I found when I was investigating the old records, something about Clara." Before he could continue, one of the federal agents approached hurriedly with a phone. "Dr. Evans," he called urgently. "It's from the station. Arthur Vanderbilt, he what?" the prosecutor asked, taking the phone. The news that followed made everyone freeze. During his statement, Arthur had had a nervous breakdown. Between screams and sobs, he had begun to confess not only the crimes they already knew about, but something much worse. "Clara didn't die of complications during childbirth," said Dr. Evans, repeating the words he heard on the phone. She discovered something in the days before, something that made her confront Arthur." Maria let out a muffled sob, hugging Caterina protectively. "What did she discover?" Theodora asked, although she feared the answer. "That it wasn't the first time," Roberto replied, his eyes fixed on the documents in the red folder. "Clara discovered that Arthur had already done this before, in another city with another family." A heavy silence fell over the group as Roberto explained what he had found. Years before meeting Clara, Arthur had married another wealthy woman. He had also prevented her from having children through abuse, and had also arranged an illegal adoption to gain access to the family's inheritance. "And what happened to them?" Janine asked, her voice trembling. "They disappeared," Roberto replied, "mother and daughter on a car trip. The woman's body was found, but the girl was never found," Dr. Evans completed, still on the phone. "Arthur is confessing everything now, says he couldn't carry this weight anymore." Caterina, who had remained silent until then, raised her eyes filled with wisdom beyond her age. "That's why Mum Clara was so scared," she said softly. "She knew he could hurt her like he hurt the other lady." And that's why she prepared everything so carefully, added Theodora. The hidden documents, the evidence in different places, the people chosen to help. She knew she wouldn't survive, said Maria, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. But she did everything to ensure that our girl was protected. Benny, who had listened to everything attentively, pulled on his father's shirt sleeve. "Dad," he called with his childish voice, "can't we help find the other girl? The one who disappeared?" Roberto hugged his son, also crying. "They're already looking, son. Now that Arthur has confessed, they're going to reopen the case." "What about the hospital?" Theodora asked suddenly. "What's going to happen? So many people depend on it." "That," said Dr. Evans with a small smile, "is something we can already resolve. With Arthur arrested and the evidence of the illegal transfers, all the embezzled money will be recovered. And as the legitimate heir, Katerina, through her legal guardians, will be able to decide the fate of the assets." "Legal guardians?" Maria repeated, visibly tensing. "Yes," the prosecutor replied gently. "You, as the biological mother and whoever else the court determines is suitable to share custody. Someone who has already proven to be able to protect and love Katerina." All eyes turned to Theodora, who was still holding Benny's hand firmly. She began, emotional. "Please," Maria interrupted. "You're already like a mother to her, and I just want to be able to be part of her life in some way." Katerina looked from one to the other, her eyes shining. "Can I have 3 moms?" she asked innocently. "Mom Clara in my heart, Mom Maria who carried me in her belly, and Aunt Theo who saved me?" The question, in its childish simplicity, made everyone smile through their tears. There, under the old tree that guarded so many stories, a new family began to form, not by ties of blood or legal papers, but by the love that had survived all the attempts to destroy it. But as the agents continued to examine the documents, one last discovery awaited to be revealed. Something in the oldest papers in the red folder that would change not only Katerina's future, but also bring justice to that other lost girl so many years ago.